welcome to another conversation. As you know, we try to keep folks informed and up to date, things that are going on in and around the community, whether it's events, whether it's politics, whether it's the election season. Our conversation today is just that. We're actually going to talk a little bit about the next year's election, state elections. They're right around the corner. I know it's the summertime. You would think, why would you be talking about elections next year? Well, it promises to be quite the election year. Joining us is a gentleman who is a candidate for governor. He's a Republican. His name is Mike Kennealy, and he is our guest. Welcome to the show, sir.
Kevin, thanks so much. Great to be here. Appreciate it.
Let's start out. Let's not assume everybody knows who you are.
Yeah, right.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Like I'm a son of Massachusetts, raised in Medford and Reading, Massachusetts. My mom took care of 4 kids. My dad was a member of the local steelworkers union. Put himself through 9 years of night school at Bentley College to get an accounting degree. Became an accountant, joined one of his clients, Roach Brothers Supermarkets, and then became their CEO years later. And so I grew up here in Massachusetts watching a father go from the factory floor to the CEO suite, and I learned a lot about hard work and determination through that process. I had my own career in business, 19 years in the private equity business, traveling all across the country, meeting 1,000 CEOs across 40 states, and our firm invested in 100 companies. We built businesses and created jobs. But I decided about a dozen years ago what I wanted to do for the rest of my career was public service here in Massachusetts, and that's what I've done. 2 years working on the turnaround of the Lawrence Public School District in 2013 and 14. 8 years in the Baker administration, 4 years in the governor's cabinet as the Housing and Economic Development Secretary, and the last couple of years at Boys and Girls Clubs of Boston, as well as service in local government on my finance committee here in our town of Lexington. So what I offer Kevin in this race is broad experience across business, local government, education, state government, and the nonprofit sector. And that, I believe, is the track record and the experience one needs to defeat an incumbent governor and to lead the state effectively.
So what was the reason, what inspired you to run for governor?
That's a great question. Like, I look at the totality of my experience on the one hand, and also the needs and opportunities of the state right now. And we're looking at a state now where I think there's 3 urgent needs. One is we got to create a state we all can afford to live in. Secondly, a great future for everybody in Massachusetts. And third, a government we can believe in. Happy to talk about any one of those. But that's how I view the pressing issues and opportunities going forward. When I look at my background and my skill set, I know I can help us achieve all those objectives. Governor Healy cannot do that. She's proven that. So I look at this race out of a state of concern for Massachusetts and where we're going, and recognize that we have incredible opportunities in front of us with the right leadership. But we need different leadership. And I love Massachusetts and love public service, and that's why I'm in this race.
So for the first time in several years, the legislature was able to have the conference committee to get a budget, the fiscal 26 budget, onto the governor's desk.
Yes, yeah.
She signed that spending plan.
Yeah.
What's your assessment of that spending plan?
It's too much. It's about $61 billion. And the state budget about a dozen years ago was only $30 billion. Now, if you'd asked our citizens a dozen years ago, would you like to see a doubling of state government in the next dozen years? I don't think anybody would have said yes. But that's where we are right now. We have doubled the size of state government. And we've got to find a way to bring spending down, bring taxes down, and become more competitive. So I think it's an amazing number, $61 billion and a doubling of state government. I don't think any of us want that. And we talk about a government you can believe in. There's a lot of reasons I just don't believe in the government we have today in Beacon Hill. It's not fiscally responsible. It's not accountable. It's not transparent. It obviously can't manage a crisis. But the fact that we've got a state budget at that high level, I think is indicative of a government we should not have faith in today.
Do you think the state is on a sustainable fiscal path? And what changes would you implement to improve the financial discipline that the state sorely needs?
That's a great question. So look, the answer to your first question is no, we're not on a sustainable path. And I say that for a few reasons. One is the spending is very, very high. And part of that spending has been supplemented by one-time federal revenues along the way, which are surely going to go away. Right. So very high spending. Revenue from the so-called millionaire's tax, which I think over time is going to decrease.
Sure.
I think it's a competitive disadvantage for the state. I think people will continue to leave the state, so revenues will go down from that. But third is our economy. It's important to note that every dollar the government has to spend is generated by the private economy. And so let's look at the state of that economy today. We are 50th among the 50 states in job creation. So if you think about the confluence of those three factors, very high level of spending, at least one item of revenue, the millionaire's tax, I think that revenue will go down. And then third, the broader tax base, which is a function of how strong the economy is and looking at a weakening economy. I think you're going to have revenue challenges over time and a very high level of spending. And the problem is, at some point when revenues abate and the spending continues, Beacon Hill is going to say, well, we've got a revenue problem. We need more revenue. No, we don't. We need less spending and get that spending in line with a sustainable level of revenue.
You're somebody who understands the economy. What is the current health of the state's economy, and what sectors do you believe need the most help?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I mean, in terms of when you're dead last in job creation among 50 states, that is not a strong economy. And so in the Baker administration, for example, in 8 years, the state created about 230,000 jobs. In the Healy administration in the last couple of years, we've lost 25,000 private sector jobs, while the state has gained 10,000 government jobs. That's not the direction you want the economy to grow in. You want a very growing, robust, vibrant private sector economy. That's not what we have today. So first of all, you've got to get your fiscal house in order. The state has to be competitive. And you got to recognize, I come back to my private equity career traveling to 40 states, you realize in that process, we're a great state. I think we're the best place. But there's a lot of places in this country to build a living and make a life, and you got to have a competitive mindset. We've got serious competitive headwinds now around taxes and spending and regulation and the cost of living here. So we have to address those foundational elements that impact all businesses. In terms of certain sectors, we're a global leader in things like life sciences and information technology. We got to figure out ways to extend, if not maintain, if not extend our leads in those sectors. We got to look out for our Main Street businesses too. A lot of people are employed by small businesses, right? These are our downtown, our Main Street businesses. And you talk to them, they feel like they're being hurt by taxes, regulation, insurance costs, energy costs. So you got to look after our big companies, our big innovative companies, and our small Main Street businesses. And then you have to take a regional approach. We're a very economically diverse state. People outside Massachusetts probably think about Boston and Cambridge. That's clearly part of our economy. We're a very diverse place with a lot of different regions. And see, the approach I took when I was the Economic Development Secretary was look at all the strengths and weaknesses by a region and develop plans for each one of those. And that's the approach we have to get to right now.
So you don't feel like maybe offering any incentives for small and medium businesses to kind of help them and say, hey, you're part of the equation. We need you. Let us help you with these tax incentives or certain incentives that will help them in the long run.
I think it's less around incentives and direct support from the government and more around just really listening to people and what's on their minds. Okay. If you talk to small business owners, health insurance, for example, for them is a huge cost factor, right? We have to do something about the health insurance costs for small businesses. Energy costs impacts virtually everybody, all businesses, big and small, as well as consumers. And this is a government that does not have an energy policy. She has a climate agenda, which is driving up energy costs. So I think you can, what has to happen is what we did in the Baker administration, what I did as the Housing and Economic Development Secretary, is get out there, walk the downtowns, walk the main streets, listen to small businesses, find out what's on their minds, take that back to Beacon Hill and take action. That is simply not happening today.
What could the Kennealy administration do to help regulate or at least bring down energy costs? Because right now, utilities are through the roof.
It's through the roof. I've had this saying now, supply and demand is undefeated, right? If you want lower costs, you need more supply. And we've got a governor now that's bragged about shutting down natural gas pipelines. That is not constructive, to say the least. And she's got a reliance on imported hydropower and wind and other sources of energy. We need a very broad portfolio of energy sources, right, including natural gas. And so if we get more supply in, hopefully price will go down over time. But the energy bills people face today are a function not only of the cost of the energy, but also a lot of these fees that end up on people's bills to help facilitate the so-called energy transition. We got to get out of that game. We need to have a much more cost-sensitive approach to energy. We focus on supply and availability and affordability of energy. Not this climate-driven agenda, which is making energy too expensive.
You talked a little bit about housing. Somebody you specialized when you were part of the Baker administration in housing. Our current administration has signed a $4 billion, $5 billion bill to try to stimulate housing growth. There's been talk about taking some of the the unused properties that the Commonwealth has and using that for housing. Is there a tried and true strategy to be able to create more housing? And we'll get to the MBTA Communities Act in a moment, but let's talk about the other communities that aren't a part of the 177 that are expected to do something. What do we do to, A, create more housing and bring down the cost of those who want to, rent and not necessarily buy?
Yeah, look, the only way to bring down costs is have more supply. And we've been in a housing crisis now in Massachusetts for a long time. And over about a 30-year period of time, we cut in half our level of housing production. And again, back to supply and demand. If you cut off supply and you get rising demand, you have rising price. Right. And so in Massachusetts, our housing costs were about the national average in 1980. And now we're number 3 in the country. So thankfully, Hawaii and California are still more expensive than us, or else we'd be number 1. But housing is very expensive here. And the only way to moderate the price of housing is to create more housing. But in Massachusetts, that has to be done in partnership with our cities and towns. So we have 351 communities. They're all different. They all have different issues and different opportunities. And they all get to say, they all control what happens within their city or town. And the governor has to respect that. It's the role of the governor and state government to help our cities and towns produce the housing they want versus mandate the housing they don't want. Using surplus land, that's a great idea. We should do more of that. All right. But I think what's happened the last couple of years, I know we're going to get to MBTA communities, I think the tone has changed. In our administration, the Baker administration, we talked a lot about the fact that, we got to produce a lot more housing. Let's get out there in the communities, listen, learn, find out what's happening, bring the tools in the toolbox the state has, and make the case for more housing. The most important thing we did around housing was something called housing choice. And what that did was just make an easier path at the local level so cities and towns can produce the housing they want. And that's the approach that has to be taken.
It was during, I believe, during the Charlie Baker's one of his State of the Commonwealth addresses. He had mentioned that we're low when it comes to housing.
Yeah, incredibly low. Yeah.
And I know that the MBTA Communities Act was kind of something that was created during his time, but it has been carried forth with the current administration. I get the whole idea of needing denser housing near, the commuter rail.
Yeah.
But is there a way to do it without penalizing communities who want to push back and want to have say in what's done?
I hope so. I mean, we were surprised that the legislature passed that. And MBTA communities was not our idea. We played no role in creating it. We never advocated for it. But then it got passed. And it's a legislative mandate. And we were not in favor of mandates then. I'm not in favor of mandates now. So the question we asked ourselves was, now that it's been passed, how do we make it as flexible as possible for cities and towns to adopt it? I think we largely succeeded in that. I think about 80% of the communities that have had to address it have done so. But for the ones that are struggling with it, the approach is not to double down on mandates and threats and lawsuits. It's to get out there and find out what their concerns are and help them get to a place where they can use this as a tool in their toolbox versus something that's a hard mandate from the state. You don't get anywhere in Massachusetts by telling cities and towns what to do. We've got a very long tradition, tradition, culture, statute, pick your word, around local control. It is critically important. And again, the role of the governor is to help our communities do what they want versus tell them what to do.
If we're still 2 years from now, you're elected in January of 27.
Yeah.
And this is something that's still relevant. What does your administration do in regards to those communities that are possibly going to get penalized?
Get out and listen and find out what their real concerns are and try to address them. That's all you can do. And I think it's really unfortunate the way that this law has been weaponized by the current governor and current attorney general. It is not the right approach. If someone has a concern, don't sue them. Go listen to them.
Okay. It's not necessarily so much in the news, but it was for the longest time in regards to the migrant crisis.
Yeah.
With migrants being housed, the state at an exorbitant rate. To be able to house them. Situations where there were individuals who had criminal records that were living here locally on the South Shore.
Yeah.
Give me your thoughts on the crisis itself. And the emergency use of the right to shelter law that was used by this current
Got a lot of
administration.
thoughts on this one. Like I was in an interesting position as the outgoing Housing and Economic Development Secretary, sitting down with incoming Governor Healy, incoming Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, three of us together. And I was asked, what are you worried about? I said, I'm worried that you're going to have a migrant crisis. And my logic was there were three factors: a humanitarian crisis in some of these countries, an open federal border in the Biden administration, and our status in Massachusetts as the only one of the 50 states that's right to shelter. And I said this will virtually guarantee that thousands of people will cross the border and find their way to Massachusetts. And that's what happened. The first lesson in any crisis, I think, is address the root causes early and aggressively. And that didn't happen. The border stayed open for years, and we had this right to shelter law on the books, not amended, not changed for years. And sure enough, more and more people came here. So a couple things. We have to reform the right to shelter law. It's been with us for over 40 years now, since 1983. And I would argue that no one really paid much attention to it for about 40 years. It was meant for Massachusetts families that have become homeless. I think it's very noble in its intent. I think it served its purpose for a long period of time. It was not meant to address a global humanitarian crisis, which is what's happened now. And so that should have been reformed a long time ago, but clearly needs to be done now. Thankfully, the federal border is a lot more secure, right? So that will cause the inflow of people, if you will, to slow down for sure. But I think in this administration, they did not address the root causes early enough, and their solutions are always kind of behind the curve. They're always playing catch up. And that's
reactive, not proactive?
Exactly. That's a terrible place to be in a crisis. You want to be managing this very aggressively. The communication, the transparency was not what it should have been. You look at, it took a long time for folks to understand that some of the horrific criminal incidents that happened in these shelters, right? They were not forthcoming with those details. The communication with our cities and towns is not very strong. And then you see practices like no-bid contracts, which the auditor uncovered. So this is a textbook example of bad crisis management and bad crisis leadership. And my approach would have been quite a bit different.
Okay. Do you believe that Massachusetts should be doing more or less to support migrants that may still be arriving into the Commonwealth?
More or less. Look, I mean, again, you have to reform the right to shelter, right? And that has been the principal means of supporting people, is saying we're going to guarantee them shelter. We simply can't do that. We can't afford it, right? And so we should all be in favor of legal immigration, right? And that's helped our economy a lot over the years, right? But we have to get out of this business of housing migrants at the scale we have, because we simply can't afford it. In terms of the numbers, I think it's been about $3 billion so far. And I say I think because the details are still a little hard to come by. That's an enormous amount of money, right? And I went through 8 budget cycles in state government. I never felt like there was $3 billion lying around to spend on something new. So it's enormously challenging. And you think about the impact on our cities and towns, it's a few things. People are being housed in our cities and towns, obviously. But also, what's the impact on local aid going to be? If we're spending $3 billion at the state level on what effectively is a new initiative, that's bound to crowd out some other areas of spending.
Well, when you talk about $3 billion, knowing here on the South Shore during the spring, there were a lot of communities that actually went for overrides because the state couldn't give them enough money.
Right.
And there wasn't enough money on those cherry sheets. It'd be nice to give that money back to the communities.
It sure would. But think about the two factors you talked about so far around budgets. State budget through the roof and local budgets being challenged, right? That is not a happy place to be, right? If we're going to spend that much money as a state, which we shouldn't, hopefully the cities and towns are seeing their share of that, and that isn't happening right now, for sure.
Let's shift gears, talk a little bit about transportation. Give me your thoughts on priorities when it comes to transportation, the infrastructure, whether it's our roads and our bridges, the MBTA.
Yeah. Well, I think it sounds like they're making some progress on the MBTA. All right, that the current general manager seems to be doing a good job and making some progress there. So that's good about boosting ridership by boosting confidence in the system. I think that's important. We need to have enough revenue to spend on infrastructure and repairing roads and bridges. Again, I'm very concerned about the state budget and where dollars are being allocated and if they're going to their highest and best uses. We need to maintain our infrastructure. But we need to have a very thoughtful conversation about where are people living and working in Massachusetts, and how do we marry infrastructure investment, transportation, and housing, and do that in a really proactive, strategic way. It does get back to the governance of the style of this administration, if you will, which is, I think it is very reactive and very status quo. And in a lot of ways, managing our decline versus leading us forward. And you need a much more proactive approach around where do we want to be as a state, and how do we put state dollars behind those items, infrastructure, transportation, and housing, in ways that mirror how people want to live and work in different ways. So we have to have a much more strategic approach and a much more aggressive partnership, active partnership with our cities and towns. I'm not seeing that today.
How important is your administration's relationship with the current administration down in D.C.? How important is that to be able to get federal dollars?
It's got to be important. And again, it's this idea of leadership tone and priorities and governance style. You know, Governor Healy's approach when things happen out of Washington she doesn't like is to go on TV. And my approach would be to get on a plane and get down to Washington and make the case for Massachusetts, right? And get those federal dollars. I don't understand whose purpose it serves, other than Maura Healey's, to go on TV and protest what the president's doing. That doesn't help anybody. It may boost her national political profile, but in terms of having a working relationship with the president, which you always need to do when you're governor, that doesn't help. And so my approach would be very different. Governor Healey built her reputation professionally on suing Donald Trump. My approach will be to find a way to work with the president, and that's what any governor should do responsibly for their state.
Okay. Let's talk about coastal priorities.
Yeah.
And let's also talk about the commercial fishing.
Sure, yeah.
First, you got a lot of coastal communities here on the South Shore.
Yeah.
And when we have a storm, a lot of folks are worried about seawalls and being able to get dollars in case they have to rebuild from a storm. Have you heard from communities in regards to that particular issue?
I have. We had a program, the Seaport Economic Council in the Baker administration, with a real focus on coastal communities. And we absolutely need to do that. And again, it speaks to having the availability of state dollars to devote to some of those projects. But it's critically important. It is part and parcel with an economic development and investment strategy where you look at every one of the regions of the state and what are their unique opportunities and challenges, and coming up with the programs for them. But yeah, we need to do that for sure. With regard to the fishing industry, I would appoint someone on my administration to be a liaison with the fishing industry and understand their needs. I look at things like, where wind turbines are being placed and the impact that has on fishing, right? I look
Regulations.
At regulations, for sure. It is such a complex web of regulations that the fishing industry faces at the federal, state, and local level, understanding that. And also things like the millionaire's tax. Like that should not apply to fishing boats and equipment and so forth. Those are people's livelihoods. That's not a financial windfall. I'm not in favor of the millionaire's tax in any context, but if we have it, it should not apply to the fishing industry in that way, for sure.
Okay. Education. Give me your thoughts on where the state of education here is in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I ask you this because I have a regular conversation with state reps and state senators, and knowing that the last bill that was the last spending plan that was just passed, every year I hear this conversation about, we increased per pupil spending because every year it resets to $30 per pupil. And I'm like, well, what did you raise it to? And a lot of times they try to raise it to 100, 120. Is there not a way to be able to make sure that there's enough funding for education and make sure that also that it's fair and equitable? Well, I hear the complaints about the funding formula. What does your administration do when it comes to education in those areas?
Well, funding has to be fair and equitable, for sure, but the educational outcomes are not always a function of financial inputs, if you will. Okay, I come back to my time. I mentioned I was part of the turnaround team at Lawrence Public Schools. Okay, in over 2 years, we did things like cut the size of the central office bureaucracy by 40% and put the dollars in the classroom. Introduced a whole set of innovative new programs, brought parents and teachers and community members together, and turned over some of the worst performing schools to outside operators, brought in much better school principals, really worked with the teachers, brought people together. And a high school graduation rate at Lawrence High School that was 52% when we started became 72% 2 years later, right? And that's an example of just having a very strategic approach to increasing educational outcomes for our kids. I'm not seeing any of that out of the Healy-Driscoll administration. I mean, I hear people talk about the fact that we're number one in public education. We still are on the national assessment number one, but no one wants to say that our kids' reading scores peaked in 2011, their math scores peaked in 2013, and only 40% of our kids can read and do math at grade level. So we're a long way from having the kind of high-performing K-12 education system we need, and it requires just a different approach and a different focus. You talk about budget priorities. I mentioned that $61 billion budget. There's all of $25 million for high-quality reading instruction. $25 million. $25 million for high-dosage tutoring, which we know works for our kids, right? So if we cut other areas of the budget, it would free up dollars to allocate more money to things that I think are more strategically important. But where's our strategy, for example, around artificial intelligence, right? That could really transform public education, right? Where's our replacement for the MCAS, which is no longer a high school graduation standard, right? We're having a debate now on Beacon Hill about vocational technical school admissions, all right? Who should get in, who shouldn't? Let's have a different discussion, which is how do we expand those programs so dramatically that anybody who wants to go can go to it? But we need to look at K through 12, voc tech schools, community colleges, higher ed as a workforce development engine, and make sure we have a program where there's high standards, high accountability, real innovation, and much better outcomes. That's what we have to get to.
Okay. So we start to wind down our conversation.
Yeah.
Again, thank you, Mike, for joining me.
Great to be here.
If you're elected, you're sworn in 2027.
Yes.
What would you say the first three actions would be during your first 100 days, your first year? What do you feel would be the first three actions?
It's going to be really busy. You know, I think if we're still with this migrant crisis, we have to say day one, make it very clear we're not a sanctuary state. And I think Governor Healy sent a very mixed message on that one, and find a way to have local, state, and county law enforcement work with the federal government and get criminals out of our shelters, out of our streets, and out of our state. We have to get our arms around this migrant crisis, if it's still with us at that point. All right, that's one thing. We have to support the auditor in a request to finally have the will of the people prevail around a state audit of the legislature. That's an important one. That's another example where leadership tone matters, and having a governor say, look, 72% of the people wanted that to happen. It needs to happen. That's one. The budget's another. I mean, this idea that we've doubled the size of state government, right, and continuing to look for new sources of tax revenue, that's got to stop. So I'll declare in no uncertain terms, we're not going to raise taxes. Stop coming up with ideas for new taxation. Let's find ways to bring taxes down. That's one for sure. In terms of cost of living, you know, real, actionable, practical strategies on bringing down the cost of housing and energy and our costs for small businesses. We have to get after that one, kind of day one and beyond. And hopefully within those 100 days, we're going to have a real plan for education, because we need it. We don't have a plan today. So I come back to the 3 points of our campaign around affordability, opportunity, and better government. We're going to have a very aggressive plan in the first day, first week, and first 100 days on all three of those.
And talking about, you know, you're in a blue state. How do you see yourself being able to work with, a majority of Democrats in the state legislature? You feel that that's something that's going to be easy enough for you and your lieutenant governor to be able to do?
Well, I've done it as a cabinet secretary. I helped get major legislation done. And I think what a governor can do, a Republican governor of the state, is a couple things. One is to simply have good ideas, good common sense ideas, and get the public on your side, and then really work very constructively with the legislature. When we were trying to get our housing legislation done, I met with 100 legislators individually and made the case for it. So yeah, you can work constructively with the legislature. I note that in our state, we're known for being a so-called blue state. In some respects, we're a purple state with a blue government. We're 65% independent,
right,
only 8% Republican, but where 3/4 of the voters are not Democrats, but yet Democrats control every statewide office, every federal office, and 80+% of the legislature. So I think the people want balance. 5 of the last 7 governors have been Republicans. And so a Republican governor will serve as a balance for this Democratic legislature. I think given the composition of the voters I mentioned, that's what people want. And then it's up to that Republican governor to work productively with people, which is what I've done my whole career. I've got a career in business, and I mentioned local government, education, state government, the nonprofit sector. That has gotten me around the state all over the place. 151 cities and towns as the cabinet secretary. work in Lawrence and lots of neighborhoods in Boston and work in all of our gateway cities. So what I come to the table with is a broad set of relationships all over the state and across sectors and across party lines, and I'll bring that into the governor's office.
Okay. This could be the hardest question
Oh,
I've asked you.
What do we got? All
so
right.
far, looking at the state of sports these days,
Yeah.
who would you say has the best chance to win? That we know the Celtics are a year removed from winning a title.
Yeah.
Who will be the next team to? Because right now our sports teams are kind of a little bit of a disarray. Although the Sox are kind of on a little bit of a win streak right now before the All-Star break.
They are. I'll tell you, following the Boston sports teams has been a great tradition of ours in our family. And given the ages of my kids, they've seen a lot of winning over the years.
Yes.
It's been a wonderful family experience going to games and following the teams. If I had to pick one team that's going to be the next one to win a championship, I'm still going to say the Celtics.
Wow.
Because even though we've lost some players who are terrific for us, I think the core of that team is still strong. And so if I had to pick one, I hope they all do soon. If I had to pick one, I'd say the Celtics.
See, I'm leaning more towards the Patriots. I like what Mike Vrabel's doing. I like what
Terrific.
We'll see.
It's great.
We'll see what happens. Is there anything I haven't asked you, or anything we haven't touched upon, but you feel it's kind of important while you're sitting in front of the cameras?
It's a great question, Kevin. Look, I think for me, personal motivation and desire to do the job is critical. And I walked away from a business career at age 45, and I told myself, I want to spend the rest of my days doing public service, right? And I told myself, if I just find, big problems, big challenges, great people to work with, and really dedicate myself to that over the course of a long period of time, I can have a big impact on Massachusetts. So I'm kind of 12 years into that career trajectory, and I love the work. And I've seen the job of governor up close. And it is an amazing opportunity to impact the lives and futures of 7 million people in 351 cities and towns. So that's one thing I want to get across to people, is just the desire to compete for a win and do the job and impact the future here in Massachusetts.
Okay. And if folks want to find out more about your campaign or get involved?
Yeah, MikeKennealy.com. You can find more information about me, the campaign, our issues, ways to volunteer, donate. So check it out.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for being here today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
And we want to thank you for tuning into a program like this. The idea is to better inform you about some of the things that are going on in and around where you may work and live here on the South Shore. We want to thank you for tuning in. Until next time, have a great day.